everybody. We are learning this week in chapter 18 about the Ottoman Turks or the Ottoman Empire. Now, it's actually hundreds of years after it began, because back in chapter 8 they actually introduced the Ottoman Turks, and that they said that it was created or started, the empire started growing in 1299, and now we are currently in the 16 and 1700s of the Ottoman Empire. So it was a couple known facts about it. It lasted from basically 1300 to 1920 something. So one of the longest lasting empires, one of the biggest empires at its peak. We're now where it's starting to maybe possibly decline a little bit with the rulers that we're learning about. But just so you know, it's a Turkish empire. Their faith and their culture is Islamic, and every single ruler of the Ottoman Empire was always an Islamic ruler, and that means they followed Allah. They're not Christian, but they're monotheistic, and they were called sultans. So the rulers of Ottomans were sultans. They weren't tsars, they weren't emperors, they weren't shoguns, but they were all very powerful, and they were the power leaders of their time. They were also inherited. They didn't just win it. You know, they couldn't just battle for it. They were born into sultanhood, and it was always the eldest son, so he had to watch his back. And it said in the reading, I think, that some of them would put their brothers in jail because their brothers might try to assassinate them or execute them and then take power from them. So they would put them in jail, and they would wait until they had their firstborn son, which would take over when they died, and then they would kill him. So it wasn't really the safest place to be born into that family. But one of the interesting things that you should look up is the Topkapi Palace, which was in Istanbul. Istanbul is the center of Turkey. It's one of the big cities. It used to be their capital. So a lot of these sultans, all of them would probably live in Istanbul. You can look up some of the beautiful architecture of that place, and the mosques. The Fountain of Ahmed, who we learn about in chapter 18, was built at the Topkapi Palace. So I want to tell you really quickly with that palace, they had tons of rooms. They would live in this beautiful palace. They had tons of beautiful gardens. It's amazing. And they would flip rooms each night. The Sultan would sleep in a different room because he never knew if somebody was going to attack him. So they lived a very paranoid life. Even though they lived prosperously and they were treated like royalty, they also did not trust people. So that's an important fact. Another thing I want you to know about the Ottoman culture and the Ottoman Empire that they were known as a very tolerant system toward other religions. Even though they ruled a ton of area, at one point it was like most of the Middle East, parts of Northern Africa, and into Eastern Europe, possibly lower parts of below Russia, but they accepted other faiths to live amongst them. So they allowed Jews to be Jewish and Christians to be Christian and Hindus to be Hindu. So that was something interesting about their culture at the time. The reason why they were so powerful is another thing I want you to know about. They had really strong armies, very, very highly experted armies, okay? And the reason they had that was because they had some of their own Turks that would fight for them, but typically they would actually go and recruit young boys from poor people's homes that lived amongst the Ottoman Empire, and they would typically choose Christian boys, and these young boys would be taken from their homes, sometimes like looked at as slaves, but I think there was actually trades that went on as well, and it sounds really horrific. I don't think it sounds good, but these janissaries were actually well esteemed and treated very well by the Turks. They recruited them, they brought them into their culture, they fed them the way they ate, they taught them really highly, they became scholars, they became educated, they were also really trained in military, and they also converted to Islam. So by the time they got to be adults, they really, really were trustworthy for the Sultan. And I think they were treated pretty well. I think that it sounds like a horrible thing to us, but in that time period of the culture, it was more accepted. And these janissaries were actually the reason why the Ottoman Empire became so powerful, and also the same reason why it later became defeated, because the janissaries took over and revolted against the later sultans. So that's interesting too. So the first guy we learned about in chapter 18 was Mustafa, and he's more in the 1600s, and his big thing was that he tried to invade Vienna, Austria, and they were trying to take over Austria, and they at first were really powerful and came on strong, but I think as the war went on and it lasted too long, things got kind of disorganized and some fallout happened. I think they put these underground tunnels that took a lot of work and effort, and they were going to they were going to set off a bomb in the tunnels, and I read somewhere where the bomb didn't go off or it got stamped out, and so they were chased out of Vienna after probably many years, and Mustafa lost his reign at that point. Later, this guy Ahmet III, the next sultan, took over, and that was the main gist of what we are learning about, was the tulip era. So he was known as the Tulip King. He loved tulips, and tulips had been around for centuries by that time. They had originally been founded by the Turks and people that were in Persia, but they actually made their way over to become really popular in the Netherlands and parts of Holland. And during this period of time, the tulip era was from 1718 to 1730. It was a time of peace. It was like they had a bunch of wars. They had, fought with the Russians. They had fought with the Viennans. They had fought, and now they were kind of taking a break, and they were enjoying some peace and prosperity. The Ahmet guy was obsessed with tulips. Tulips were known as like a form of beauty and peace, and they also were really reflective of their art and their architecture at the time, because Islamic people were not allowed to draw animals or people in their art that would be in their mosques, because it was idolatrous in their mind. It was against God. So they could draw these beautiful flowers, and because tulips also were named after a turban, they wore these turbans on their head that look like onions. You guys can look up some of the sultans and see all the different huge, gigantic turbans that they wore. They reminded them of the bulbs of tulips. So tulip was named after the word turban. That's an interesting fact. And Miss Becca may do some really cool art ideas with you with tulips, because tulips were everywhere in their gardens, in their homes. Peasants loved them, rich people loved them. I think at one point in the Ahmet's reign, you could buy a certain tulip for $600. It was like gold, So they didn't stay as popular for as long, but they never really truly lost their popularity in that area. Okay, so just to wrap it all up, the Ottoman Empire was known for, especially during this time, during Ahmet, I think the Janissaries started, that's when revolts started happening more, and over the next 100 years, because Ahmet really, like Peter the Great, he wanted more Western ways. He liked the Renaissance times, the beautiful Baroque art that they did, the architecture. He was influenced a lot by culture and arts and leisure and all these things coming from Europe. And some of the military Janissaries really wanted things to stay the way they were. So I think a lot of these Western ideas were seeping into the Eastern ideas, and that was also wreaking havoc. They also got their first printing press, and they started printing a lot of the books, and a lot more people were becoming authors. So you can see during this time of the Renaissance, there was a lot of changes happening all around Europe and into Russia and into the Middle East area. So this would have been mainly where you would have seen a lot of the Ottoman Empire into Turkey area. Okay, so I didn't show you too much of a map, but you have a map in all of the stuff that I sent out. I would love for you all to know the definitions and be able to tell me about the tulip era, be able to tell me what a sultan is, what Islam, you know, some ideas behind Islam. I would love for you to be able to draw the fountain of Ahmed or tell me a little bit about that fountain. Just come with some knowledge, and I hope you do the reading. I hope you watch some videos. I can't wait to see you on Tuesday and talk more about it. Take care. Bye.